computer. Here we go. Okay. Hi, my name is Sony, and I'm here with Jerry Krase, who is an Emeritus and Murray Koppelman Professor of Sociology at Brooklyn College. Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Fine, Sony, and how are you? I'm glad to finally meet you.
I'm glad to meet you too. It's wonderful being together here and talking about our candidates. So Jerry has written a number of books on gentrification and displacement. He looked globally, not in one volume, but two volumes at the gentrifiers and the displaced. And he also looked locally in Prospect Lefferts Garden, Crown Heights, Williamsburg, and Greenpoint. So I'm excited to hear from you, Jerry. When you listen to the candidates talking a little bit about affordable housing and displacement and things like that, what are you thinking about? What kinds of policies are you hoping to hear them address? And what kind of framework can you give to us as voters who don't know anywhere near as much as you do about this stuff?
Okay, the first thing I have to mention, give due credit to my close colleague, Judith Endesena, who is the co-author and my co-editor of those books. She's an extremely knowledgeable person who provides great insights to things. And, you know, she could be interviewed here also, but she's active in Williamsburg and Greenpoint. Yeah. You know, there's at least two ways that I think about the problem of affordable housing. Okay, so the first thing you should know is I grew up. I was born in the Red Hook houses, you know, and you know, so it's important for us to understand that kind of thing, is to see where I'm coming from. You know, this idea of what is affordable, etc. And we have this issue in our district. All right, and including neighboring districts as well, with public housing. You know, NYCHA projects that are in both Red Hook, and there's the Gowanus housing. There's quite a number of things that are there, and so that's a component of the affordable housing process. And where I see a concern, and where I think the council candidates, as well as the mayoral and other candidates, should be concerned about, is what will be done to maintain, right? Maintain the affordability of public housing, particularly as people start talking about ways of privatizing either the properties themselves or aspects of those properties, which will eventually affect the availability of that housing. Right. So in terms of it disappearing, if it becomes privatized, you know, to what degree will the new owners be able to raise rents, etc. So that's a big thing. Another thing that people often don't think about in terms of affordable housing is to try to understand why the housing is unaffordable. Right. So in one sense, what we often talk about is this idea of the pressure to raise rents. You know, particularly this issue of gentrification. We see this development of luxury housing, et cetera, which gives owners of all sorts, both small owners and medium-sized owners, and of course the large owners, et cetera, this idea that what they can do is their property, their rentals are now worth more, so therefore we should raise the rent, right? That's a very big issue, and then it becomes the problem then of the tenant whose income is not going up with the idea of the neighborhood becoming a luxury neighborhood, right? So there's two ways we can deal, or we should talk about that, and that is, one is figuring out some kind of way of raising the income. Right, making those tenants better able to afford the higher rent, right, which often gets missed in this process. We seem to want people to remain poor and then figure out some ways of subsidizing them to remain poor. That's not a great idea, right? And in the same sense, particularly for the small landlords and the middle landlords, if they are to be convinced that what they ought to do is to maintain, to keep those tenants in those things, who will make up the difference, right? So I believe that if you have real tenants and they're paying rent and they're working and all this kind of stuff, and they're not already on Section 8 or some other kind of a thing, is that the landlord, the small landlords and the middle landlords, they ought not to be subsidizing the city with those rents, right? So that that this should be a process, and this is what you can ask the candidates: figure out some way of saying to those small and medium-sized landlords, if you keep these tenants, what we will do is we'll give you some kind of a tax break or some other kind of a break to make up the difference, so that these people are not displaced, that they're not pushed out, right? So that's extremely important. And then thinking about other kinds of programs, that will enable people to stay in place. We forget how, such a tremendous impact on families when they're forced to move, right? Many of these people also they have children, right? So what you're talking about is people not simply moving, so it's two adults or one adult moving to another place, but you're talking about kids going to another place, kids changing schools. It's very disruptive, right? So you have to think about it in a kind of a more holistic way, and it's not simply giving grants. It's what it really is kind of thinking about what the problem is in its many different aspects, which often forgotten. So what you'll get candidates who say, well, we'll have more Section 8 or more this and that. You have to think about it more holistically. I think they have to be asked also to understand how important these essential people are to our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in many cases, they're working in our stores, they're cleaning our houses, they're delivering orders, they're doing, they say, oh, well, this is small time kind of stuff. Yeah, what we learned during COVID was how important these people were. Well, maybe what we ought to start doing is thinking about how they should be compensated for the important things that they do. They're watching our children, they're all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah.
So when you think of these issues, they're all problems that are greater than like one singular council person. So when you hear these council people talking about what proposals they might do that involve um, moving the entire system in a direction, how can you figure out uh, who would be most successful at doing that? Are there uh, certain topics that come up that you're like, yeah, that's never going to work, no one in the city is going to go for that right now? Or uh, are there other solutions outside of larger systematic ones that you hope that they focus on first?
Yeah, I would think what's extremely important for the council level, these are not extremely powerful individuals. I would look for a council person, all right, who understands how to network with local groups, right? How to connect with them, talk with them, etc. Figure out what it is that they need, all right? But they also have to be able to network with organizations, right? Which are broader organizations, tenants' rights organizations, anti-eviction organizations, etc. And then as well at the next level, with other council people, they have to form coalitions within the council so that they can have an effect, right? So that you can have within the council coalitions, interest groups, 10, 15, 20, whatever it is, councilmen, all of whom are concerned with this, right? With this kind of issue. There are plenty of neighborhoods, not only in Brooklyn, but throughout the city, who are undergoing the same kinds of problems, right? So what they have to do is they have to find those other council people, right, and say, this is what we're going to do. My place is similar to yours. This one is maybe it's a little different, etc. We have to help each other out. That's how the council was powerful in the past, right? With these coalitions. I don't particularly care for, for ethnic coalitions and racial coalitions and all that kind of stuff. They don't work, all right? They don't work. And they don't work because it's the neighborhoods you have to represent. So you might be talking about a neighborhood who's African-American neighborhood where the Caribbeans and the middle-class homeowners and all this kind of stuff, as opposed to a different place, right? So they really have to be talking about the issues that concern their constituents, and then forming those networks, those coalitions with other council people. And then, of course, those things go up, right? In other words, they rise up to other things, to thinking in terms of foundations, right? And that's how they can exercise power. In other words, it's not just one, but 4 or 5 of them that represent hundreds of thousands of people in similar circumstances, right? And then they should be able to approach a foundation, including the Bloomberg Foundation, which this is being recorded. He's caused a lot of these problems, right? So he should be willing, to come across, since he's not paying any income tax, right?
Right.
To be able to do this kind of stuff. And I think he would be. He's a good guy. And a bit others, Ford Foundation, etc. They're all there. But what they need is structured, powerful, at least seemingly powerful entities that can approach them and come up with their own ideas, as well as figuring out what they have to offer, right? And that's the way they should do it. And they should form coalitions all the way up. And as I said to you before, I don't care for the identity coalitions. I mean, they're fine, all right? But they're not as competent and they're not as successful in getting things done, like housing, like just think about it in terms of public safety is a major issue. Public safety is a major issue, and it impacts on housing. It impacts on where people are living and how they feel about where they live, right? So and these are things that could bring people together. And so what happens is we see very easy comments about defund the police or unfund the police or refund the police, etc. You have to deal with the issue of public safety, which is much more complicated than simply abuse by police officers, etc., and demonstrations or an arrest, etc. And those things cut across all those other boundaries, including class boundaries, yeah, and they affect housing. It's nice to say that, what we'll do is we'll keep people in spaces. They may not want to live there if they can't go out on the street, and enjoy the places in which they live, and housing, keep on to housing. Housing has to do with education too, right? So we're looking at these issues in our districts about segregated schools, right? And about, well, where are people going to send their kids to school? And so housing has to do with attracting people to a neighborhood on the basis of what's being offered in terms of public and private education, and other kinds of facilities. That's part of, we just don't live in an apartment. We just don't live in a house, right? We just don't live on a block. We don't, we live, these things are broader and broader and broader. All right, and that's what we mean by living in a neighborhood. Neighborhood is many things,
Well, you know how I feel about our neighborhood. It's the best.
Yeah.
Sherry, I think that's a really great summary of things to look for that will help us as we're selecting our next council person. Thank you so much for your time. I'll stop the recording here, but I'm going to hang out with you a little bit more.
Mhm.